Well, good morning, my friends. Welcome. Good to see you. Uh, well, Christmas has passed and on to New Year's, and we are moving towards the center this morning. This is going to be the topic of our conversation. In fact, it does have some relevance to the ancient cultures and how they celebrated New Year. Um, Real quick, just to kind of break out into improv here. In ancient Sumer, they celebrated New Year by seeing it as the return to the ancient beginning, that every year, this is why we have resolutions, it's like we come back to the birth of it all, the birth of time. And the way that they would recognize the birth of time was they would actually, because the serpent represents all things that move and undulate and change, the waves of time, they would actually nail the serpent's head to the ground. And from that place, they would build their temple, which would then serve, the altar would be right where they nailed the serpent's head. This, pretty graphic. But this is where time stopped. And this is where we would go on New Year, back into the womb of the still point to renew and go back out into the waves of time. So when we come to this place of the center, all time stops. Everything goes still and quiet. All the waves cease. Right? And this is actually Patanjali's definition of yoga. In the Yoga Sutras, he says yoga is the stilling of the mind stuff, the chitta, the waves of the mind. Now keep in mind, the mind is the cause of all things, and so when we still the mind, we're stilling all things. We're stilling time. And so this idea of coming back to the center for renewal is really also at the heart of the contemplative practice, right? Centering prayer. When we go into centering prayer, we're actually finding that still point where time stops. This is where our mind and God's mind meet. And so this still point has also been symbolized in other cultures where Buddha is sitting under the Bodhi tree. And this was the symbol of his night of enlightenment when he finally reached supreme awakening. And if you know anything about the Bodhi tree, it's been referred to heavily in Joseph Campbell's material as the axis mundi. And what the axis mundi in Latin means is the axis or the still point of the world. This is where everything stops. This is where the Buddha mind meets infinity or nirvana, right? And so we're going to be talking about coming from the center this morning, because this is really where authentic life is lived. This is where we find eternal renewal or immortality. This is where we actually find ourself. Right? Coming from the center, another way of saying this is, we return to the tree of life, because in that symbol system of the Garden of Eden, the tree of life was at the center of the garden, and this is where immortality is. And when the divine, or we can't say divine, or the primordial couple, Adam and Eve, took the fruit of good and evil, or good and bad, their mind waves began to think in an independent, individualistic way, and they fell out of phase or out of alignment or attunement with the divine mind and found themselves outside of the garden, out of the center of it all, right? And there is struggle, there is lack, there is death, all right? And so this idea of New Year renewal, coming back to the center, is really at the heart of every tradition. Joseph Campbell again is saying that the cross of Jesus is another representation of the axis mundi. This is where everything stops. This is where the ego dies, right? The Jesus or the ego dies. And it's here where the Christ is reborn. And so we have to come to the center, but the way we get to the center is we too have to undergo an ego death. Or we can't return to the garden. We can't return to that resurrected state where our mind and God's mind meet. And the reason being is because God's I am is the I am that I am. So as Rumi has said, there's room enough only for one eye in this house, right? So when we come to the center, we have to realize that we are God's eye. The I am that we speak from is actually God's I am. So the only way that we can authentically come back to this place of immortality and renewal is to realize that we have this eternal I am as our true center, right? So the ego is having to shed, much like the serpent sheds its skin, because the ego is the belief that there is another I am. I am this body, I am John. All of these labels, all of this conditioning has created this false center. And as William Butler Yeats said in the poem, The Second Coming? This center cannot hold, right? The ego cannot hold as an identity. It undergoes constant stress and anxiety because it's not really real. And so we're going to go into this conversation today about coming from the center, awakening as the great divine I am. And so there needs to be some alterations in our mind. There needs to be some renovations in the way that we think, the way that we perceive. And so we'll get into all of that as we move along. So we'll just quiet down for a couple of moments, finding the center. And so we take a moment to find the gratitude for the teachings that bring us home to ourself, that bring us true and lasting happiness, freedom from all illusion, all unnecessary suffering and pain. And more importantly, we are grateful to the Great Spirit who inspires all these teachings in whatever form they take throughout time and change and culture. And so as we prepare ourselves for the message, we remember the psalm that talks about how the rivers come back to the sea and make glad the city of God. That all of these rivers of our senses, the 5 rivers of the 5 senses, reverse their course from an outward flow to an inward flow and begin to pool into the center of the heart, returning to the source, making glad the city of God. And so it is. So perhaps we can Just look at that psalm for a moment, Psalm 46. So remember, the Bible can be read metaphorically, not just in a literal historical context. So in many ways, this is the journey towards the center. This is the contemplative path. God is our strong refuge. He is truly our helper in times of trouble. For this reason, we do not fear when the earth shakes and the mountains tumble into the depths of the sea, when its waves crash and foam and the mountains shake before the surging sea. And so this is really to take our focus and attention off of the phenomena of the world. The nations are always raging. Things are always chaotic and in tumult in the environment. You can never find peace in the external world. You take refuge within to the divine center because it's only there that there's the stronghold that you can rise above the battleground and find this peace that passes all human understanding. So remember, to get to this center, we'll keep coming back to this, even the analytical and intellectual mind will have to go into abeyance. It has to be still. And this is, part of the psalm. It says, "Be still and know that I am God." So this kind of knowing is not analytical and intellectual. It's not done through the lower thought process. It's actually, like Patanjali says, yoga or divine union is when we still the mind. And in Patanjali's system, when the mind becomes still, you get to actually see that even the intellect, in Sanskrit, the buddhi, is a part of the construct of nature. It's a very subtle energy. And it's a skillful tool. It's a discerning faculty. And so Patanjali is recognizing in this yoga or divine union process that your discernment faculty is actually of primary importance in order to still. And what he's saying here then is we begin to discern the phenomena from the witnessing consciousness, right? The things that are always in tumult and change. And we actually begin to see, so we are to shut those down, still those forces, withdraw our attention, no longer be distracted by them or go out into them, finding the center. So the discernment faculty is key in that original process of coming back to the center. It must discern the real from the unreal. But in this process of becoming truly still and knowing God, the discernment faculty will eventually have to turn on itself, says Patanjali. And that means then you begin to see that it too is a construct. It too is a phenomenon. It is very subtle. It's a faculty that is very helpful. But eventually you, as the witnessing, must go beyond it. You must let it go and enter into the city of God, entering into this complete still point. That's yoga. That's union. That's knowledge. And when the Bible says, "Be still and know," it's actually also talking about something that is very intimate. So the idea of knowing is really a joining. It's a union. So you go into this coupling with God, that your I am is in erotic ecstasy, or it's been said like this, entasy. So X means out from, you could even say entasy, that you're going into this erotic coupling with God. And many cultures see that the Holy of Holies is this divine coupling of the soul with its source. The Song of Solomon in the Hebrew Bible is this representation of the soul having divine union poetically in sexual terms with the divine. The heart of Tantra, Shiva and Shakti, being in this divine coupling. All of the energies of our life are the Shakti, or the feminine power of God. The bride, going into the coupling with the bridegroom, Also a picture in the book of Revelation. Jesus as the bridegroom comes for his bride, and they join, and heaven and earth become one state. This divine ecstasy, this erotic union, is at the heart of all mystical traditions. You see it in Tibetan Buddhism with what is called the Yabyum, the divine couple in this copulating embrace, which is at the very heart of reality. So this knowing is not stale and dry. It's not colorless. It is ecstatic. It's orgasmic. It is completely fulfilling in ways that the five sense realm cannot come close to touching. So when we are being still to know God, we go into this state of divine coupling or ecstasy, which is bliss. So this is one of the ways the discerning faculty will come in handy, because when you find yourself in a lull or a sort of a low energy state, you're realizing, well, this is still part of the illusion. I haven't come fully home yet. Right? I'll know when I know. So again, it says, the river's channels bring joy to the city of God, the special holy dwelling place of the Most High. God lives within this city, which is the heart. It cannot be moved. Right? It's the axis mundi. It's the center of it all. It's beyond time. You're beyond time. Like, this is also where the ecstasy comes, because you are in this divine coupling that can never be threatened. It can never be broken unless we distract away from it. So the process of contemplative or centering prayer is to begin to really exercise a disciplined focus or attention, to become less and less tolerant of distraction, where we become so one-pointed, as Jesus says, your eye becomes single. And when your eye becomes single, you're no longer going to the left or to the right, you're staying centered on the one. And as Jesus completes that sentence, when your eye becomes single, your whole body becomes filled with light. So when the attention or witnessing faculty of your mind, the one that's aware right now, becomes completely one-pointed, then that gives you the ability to access the tree of life at the center of the garden of the heart. When that takes place, a new way of being emerges. This is the giving birth to the body of light. This is the giving birth to the Christ body, or the Buddha mind. You become completely transformed or transfigured. In the Greek Orthodox tradition, it's called theosis. You go into your resurrected body, in the here and the now. You have higher sense faculties that come from your soul. And you know, right? This is the gnosis. You know God. You're living in the light. You have been translated from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light. It is a here and now phenomenon. And it truly is the new age or the new year that we experience this. Let's see a little bit more here. Well, this is great. He says, the psalmist tells us, come, witness the exploits of the Lord, who brings devastation to the earth. Yeah, right? Devastation to the earth is the canceling out or the annulment of all mortal state. Everything that's mortal gets completely undone, right? Anything that is, in a way, representative of separation, limitation, is undone, right? And then he goes on, he says, the Lord brings an end to wars throughout the earth. He shatters the bow and breaks the spear. He burns the shields with fire. He says, stop your striving and recognize that I am God. God gives a shout, and the earth dissolves. Now, these are all symbols of the mystical or inner experience. Now, the shout that God gives and all mortality dissolves is the Om, the Amen, the word. And in the Hindu or Vedic tradition, it's the Shabda, Shabda Brahma. So at the center of the heart, we're told, this is the sound of God. Right? Yogananda has a lot to say about this. This sound of God, where the Om vibration takes all the energies of mortality and translates them back into the eternal state. So God gives a shout means that we pick up the vibration of the word. And when we're coming back to the center of the garden, we are completely rid of all of the accoutrements of time and mortality. They shatter, they discorporate, they dissolve, right? And so we do this in contemplative prayer. This is the here and now phenomenon, right? So when we are in this process, even in this conversation, we are watching the mind. Remember, distraction is the way we got out of the garden. Attention is the way we come back in, mindfulness. And so as we become increasingly mindful, we are very watchful and awake, and we're seeing anything that gives its fragrance of the earth, of mortality, of separation, limitation, fear, anxiety. Also what he had said, that he puts an end to all striving, right? Now, this is also another technical word. In the New Testament, it's referred to in the Greek as epithumia. And this is really what the Buddhists are after too when they talk about the craving. Epithumia translates into anxious self-seeking. So when we are in a state of desire or lust or epithumia, we are beholden or enslaved to the passions. And the passions are these lower forces and impulses that take us out of the garden. Remember, Eve looked at the fruit offered by the serpent, and it was pleasing to the eyes, and it was delightful, and it would make one wise. But what it did was it split the mind, and the mind became its own authority. And it became a separate entity apart from the totality. And it was now driven by passion, its own desire. Anxious self-seeking is how we got out of the garden, right? The Buddhists call this tanha, craving, right? And so Buddha said in the Four Noble Truths, craving or tanha is the source of suffering. How do we end craving? Well, the Buddha said, nirodha, right? That's the same word Patanjali said is at the heart of yoga, or divine union. Yoga, chitta, vritti, nirodha. Yoga is the stilling, nirodha, of the mind stuff. How do you get back into the garden? Be still. This is the beauty of it. There's a song from Queensryche called Silent Lucidity. And one of the lyrics is, it's been a round trip journey in your head. Master of illusion. Can you realize your dream's alive? You can be the guide. And so this round trip journey in your head is all done through this anxious self-seeking. It just keeps taking us out of the eternal moment. The still point isn't in the world. It's the center of the world. Everything in the world revolves around it. All the waves of time and change are going on around the center. We come back to the center. We go into the timeless, the spaceless, the eternal. The eternal isn't a lot of time. It's not a long time. It's the transcendence of time. And it's our only salvation, right? Because the nations are going to rage. There is going to be wars and rumors of wars. There's going to be plagues and famine. There's going to be the barbarians at the gates. That's the way this narrative of history will more than likely play out. It's circling the drain because the center cannot hold. Everyone is living from their ego. And as Yeats had said in that poem, The Second Coming, he's saying, who knows what is rousing from its 1,000-year sleep and moving its thighs, and with lion body and human head is slouching towards Bethlehem. In other words, Yeats, and he was very much into the Western esoteric tradition, he saw that, things need to play out. And, when you're dealing with forces of chaos, well, just like when you have a pimple, you have to let it come to a head before you can pop it. Then all of the toxins can leave the pimple. History is one big zit. Maybe you heard it first here. And so history has to go through these changes and difficult processes, and all the players will add their toxins to the culminating head of the pimple, and eventually it will pop, and everything will be washed out. But where are you going to be? Are you going to be caught up in the tumult? Or are you going to be quiet in the center with the peace that passes all human understanding, unthreatened by any change? Right? This is knowing the Christ. Right? This is being the martyr for Christ. A martyr is a Greek word that means a witness. It doesn't mean somebody who goes after the morbid fascination of death and dying. A martyr simply means a witness. Be the witness of the divine at the center of all life. You will be a martyr for me. You will be a witness to my glory in you. And then from this glory, you could only see the glory, because you will look through the veil of time. You will have the vision of eternity. You will know God. And when you know God from this still point, you can only see what you know. So we go into the center of the heart, and God shouts at us. The shout of the archangel is how Paul later on, the Psalm is Old Testament. Paul later, centuries later in the New Testament, talks about the parousia, the second coming. And he says, Christ will come with a great shout, with the voice of the archangel. And this is the end of the age. When you hear that shout, what's the age? You living as this lowly creature of time. What's the parousia? Translated as second coming. It's simply the return of presence. You're aware again of the divine presence at the center of your being. You are the city of God, right? So this is a very good book. I'm probably going to have a class on this eventually. The Master Speaks by Joel Goldsmith. If you're not familiar with Joel Goldsmith, Lisa has been asking me to look at his work. And yeah. I know. And now that I have, I do not regret it. This man was on fire. He wasn't a man. We could say that in truth. He was a nexus point where the Spirit healed through his channel. If you go online and look him up, you'll see just thousands of healings were done through the ministry of Joel Goldsmith. Remotely, people would just call him. Sometimes they wouldn't have to call him. He would get it on the network of Divine Mind. And these people would be healed of everything from cancers to psychological problems. He didn't put any limitations on God. And he put his mind into total attunement with God. He found the center. And as a result of that, he radiated the blessing for all. Because everyone is this. This is the divine vision. You see God in all. So let's get a little bit from Joel. With all your heart, love the Lord, and have no other gods before him. Acknowledge only the one presence. And then love your neighbor as yourself. Here we have two commandments from the Old Testament, which have become the very foundation of Christianity. Why is it necessary and important for us, first of all, to know these two commandments? There is a very important reason for it. It is important to know the commandments themselves, regardless of where they come from, because they explain the foundation of all of our work, which is the allness of God and the universality of that truth. In other words, all that is true of God is true of individual being. This individual being is every Jew, every Gentile. It is every Protestant, every Catholic. It is true of every Hindu and Muslim. It is every person in the universe, whether white, black, or yellow. If we do not accept the universality of this truth, we shall again lapse into the error that has caused every war in history, and that will continue to cause all the future wars, discords, and diseases. This error is the belief that we are something separate and apart from God, or that even if we are not, some other person is. So part of the centering prayer, coming back to Eden, coming back to the still point, celebrating the new year, is to see all things new, all things as one. Right? So whenever we have a thought of somebody being an other and somehow not like me, we know that this is a thought from the earth. It's the lower mind. It's the mortal mind. It's the separate mind. And so our discipline is to undo that. Right? In Tibetan Buddhism, in the highest form of Tibetan Buddhism, there is the shout. I just thought of it. So in Dzogchen, which is this, supreme great perfection teaching, whenever you're facing with, whenever you're facing the phenomena of mortality and duality, it's you shout, "Pat!" And it's that vibration that they're embodying that discorporates that energy or that thought form or that feeling. You discorporate it. You don't give it your belief. If you give it your energy of belief, you solidify it within your mind. You make it real. And you will always find agreement with others who have made it real themselves. And you form this aggregate of belief. And now it seems more real and solid, but it's all made up. It's all a trick of mind. It's a round-trip journey in your head. And so this is really a powerful section in Joel's book where he actually says that evil is a state of hypnotism. Right? So along these lines, whenever we're in a divided or evil state, we're undergoing a hypnotic spell. That's why there's really no fear when you begin to see that when you're coming back to the center, there is only God's reality. There is only God's truth. Everything else is illusion. And therefore, you can't fear illusion because it's not real. Right? You would have to be illusion to fear illusion. So a little bit on evil as a state of hypnotism. Does wrong thinking appear outwardly as sin, disease, and death? No, it does not. It comes to us merely as an appearance or a belief, and we accept that appearance or belief as if it were actually a real external form. Can a person who is hypnotized in believing that there is a white poodle on the hypnotist's platform ever produce a white poodle there? No. All the hypnotized thinking in the world will not produce a white poodle. It will only produce an appearance or a belief, which the victim claims is a white poodle. Now listen to this. Wrong thinking will never produce sin, disease, or death. We are not creators. God is the creative principle, and it creates only its own image and likeness. Our wrong thinking and the world's wrong thinking, therefore, will never produce sin, disease, or death. When you're hearing sin, think of separation. Such wrong thinking will only objectify the belief as an illusory picture, like our white poodle, and then look at it and say, how am I going to get rid of that? It is not even here, he says. So how can we get rid of it? There's no such thing as sin, disease, or death. And all the wrong thinking in the world that we can do will not produce such things. But the universal belief in a selfhood apart from God does produce these erroneous pictures, which we see as claiming to have substance, law, and reality, but which they do not have. All such pictures are as unreal as the white poodle, which the hypnotized man believes he is seeing. Let us remember, he is not seeing it. He believes he is seeing it. So this is beginning to take your power back. Part of the centering prayer, part of this practice of coming back to the heart and being still is, like we had said, you reverse the currents of your five senses, right? These rivers that come back to the city of God. So when we're in this process of reversing the currents of the senses, we realize that everything is flowing from us, that we're generating like a hologram within our own head. And brain scientists are saying this, right? That you're seeing this room and this guy and all the lights and everything else, but what we're really getting are these interference patterns and vibrations of electrons and neutrons and protons. This is all a frequency field, and our brain takes the frequencies, translates them into a holographic image. The chairs and the lights and everything else, the guy here doesn't exist the way you're seeing him. You've made this image through your holographic faculty within the brain functioning. Look this up, it's fascinating. So what we think we're seeing and interacting with is really something we've made as an image. And we're hypnotized by our images. We have other gods, these images or idols that we're serving. We believe the images are real, and we've forgotten the source of reality. So as we reverse the currents of the five senses, we come back to knowing that everything that our five senses are showing us is truly illusion. It's an image. It's made up. We're hypnotized. We're asleep. A little bit more from Joel on this idea. There is no way to remove that white poodle except to awaken the subject out of his state of hypnosis. How do we do that? One with God is a majority. If there were one person of spiritual vision in the audience who could laugh out loud and say or even think that there is not a white poodle to get rid of, the hypnotized man would awaken out of the dream. It is only because everyone is in agreement with him, the blind leading the blind, that it happens. If someone would consciously realize that he is merely witnessing a form of hypnosis, such a realization would quickly awaken him to the fact that hypnosis is not a power. It is a belief in a power apart from the one life. Hypnosis is a belief in a power apart from the one life. In other words, false imagination. We can conjure. In the Course, it's called the magic of the ego. We're conjurers. We're conjuring images. We're conjuring a reality that we are under a spell or hypnotized by. What if this is all real and true, what's being said here? What do you do with that? Well, it would have to radically change your life, wouldn't it? If you're really not seeing what's here, you're only seeing images. This is what Jesus says in the workbook of A Course in Miracles. Don't call what you're doing seeing. It's image making. And then he says, it will take a little while to get used to the fact that what you're seeing isn't really there. So, a little bit now to bring this home, right? So, it is the spirit, the consciousness we entertain that will do this work of undoing the images that we made, right? Because we're the conjurers and we're in a habit of doing this. We actually have to call on the spirit who will bring us back to our center, bring us back to the quiet. It is the ability when looking at a human being to perceive that which is not apparent to the human senses, and in that perception, see through the individual to the Christ of his being. So in other words, when we really want to wake up and get out of the hypnosis, we call on the Spirit takes us back to the quiet, the stillness, the center. We are bathed in glory. And that radiates through the way that we perceive the world. Our spiritual vision now will open. And as a result of that, we have to use the right use or the proper use of denial. So then my brothers and sisters are not these fragile, temporary images of the body. There's something immortal and eternal that they are. And so I'm not going to stop at the appearance level. I'm no longer going to be hypnotized by the image of my brother. I'm going to see my brother. I'm going to know my brother. Right? So the two great commandments, love the Lord your God with all your mind, strength, and heart, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's all we're ever doing, really. We're loving the God that we serve and witness to, and then we're loving our neighbor as ourselves. The trouble is, when we're in the unregenerate state, we're loving our neighbors as bodies, as these temporary forms, because that's myself. I'm loving you as myself. But when we undergo this transformation or transfiguration, we will love our neighbor as ourself. We will see the Christ. But we first must discover that within. So a little bit to finish off with Joel. So he says now, there is some resistance to all of this, right? The human being has been habitualized into thinking this way. And we have become quite comfortable and acclimated to our fallen state. And as a result of that, when this good news first appears, if we are really bought in and attached to our anxious self-seeking and our image making and the way that we think everything should be, then this good news will be very threatening to our reality structure. And we will push back. We will resist, even if it's just in a subtle form of distraction, boredom, resignation. Right? That's not for me. So here's the whole story of the human world, says Joel. It does not want its dollars, power, or position taken away from it. The world is afraid to listen to this message for fear that it might become convinced that war is not a necessity, or of the needlessness of panics and depressions. It turns away from any truly spiritual message for fear that it might be convinced of its truth, and then would have to discard such unethical business practices as misrepresentation or unfair competition. The men and women of the world are afraid to learn about spiritual truth because they know that once they have been touched by the Spirit, never again could they do the same things in business or in their home life. Never again could they be the same to their families. Those who do turn to this path must not only receive this message through their ears and through their eyes, but they must be willing to perceive it spiritually and then to live so as to carry it out in the actual expression of it. So this is the great aha, that the I am that we are so habitualized into thinking is our separate individual self is truly divine. And that all of these teachings, in whatever culture they are coming from, the truth of the matter is we all have to undergo this reorientation or reintegration into the state of Eden, the bliss, divine union, or yoga. We are an unfinished product. As Sri Aurobindo said, humanity is a transitional being. We must transition from the ape animal through to the human and then into the divine. And we're on this journey, whether we like it or not. That's why at the beginning of A Course in Miracles, he says that this is a required course. Only the time you take it is voluntary, right? So your free will can speed up or slow down your entrance into the singularity at the center of your heart. This isn't going to be the singularity of the tech bros, where you're going to upload your consciousness to a cloud, and who controls that, we don't know. No, you're going to go through the singularity of your divine nature and undergo this theosis, this transfiguration. You're going to return to Eden. And so just a final thought here. This is coming again from this wonderful book, Christ, the Eternal Tao. It's from the Greek contemplative tradition, the Orthodox Christian tradition, coupled with some of the Chinese wisdom. But this is under the section, Changing the Eye of the Soul, right? So the eye of the soul is, right now, for most of us, we're looking out through the flesh body as the physical organism. Changing that is the whole purpose of divine instruction, contemplative prayer. We undergo a metamorphosis. Our mind gets renewed and translated. So very interesting. I love this section. We'll share just a bit of it. At the moment of, and they're going to use the old world antiquated term man, but that means men and women. At the moment of man's first act of disobedience to the way, there suddenly appeared in him a sense that he had become wrong. This fundamental sense of wrongness, which is the knowledge of good and evil. It marked the birth of his ego and thus of his self-consciousness. He lost the garment of uncreated light, right? That's what we rediscover at the center. Uncreated or unborn, right? Beyond time and space. This is where we originate from as immortals or eternal being. When we re-enter that uncreated light, we undergo the transfiguration or theosis, and we know God. The I gets transfigured into God. That is our destiny. That is our natural inheritance. Anything less than that isn't worthy of you. Since man's ego was born through his trying to become a god unto himself, it is in the very nature of the ego to try to become autonomous. Hence, the ego shirks from admitting it is wrong. To admit this would be to admit that it is not a god and that there is a standard higher than itself. The fear of admission was first seen in the ego's attempt to hide from the presence of God among the trees of paradise. So this is one of the things we will confront on the return to the center. And as we have a resistance to the silence, because there is a part of us that will have to, like we said, dissolve at the sound of God. And that would mean that everything we thought and believed prior to that was a conjuring. That's why he says in the Course, free will, right, it determines how much of the curriculum you want to take at a given time. And if you're unwilling to dissolve at the sound of God's voice, then your free will can procrastinate, it can arrest your development, and you can go into full-blown, dysfunction, where the mind gets completely caught in these mental handicaps and eddies of consciousness for a long time. And it's all because at the heart of it is a resistance to give up what the Course calls the authority problem. But if we're humble and we realize everything we made was a conjuring, we can speed up and dissolve and come back to the true state of our I and be free. Right? So that's why there's really no sacrifice here, but it sure as hell feels like that to the ego. And if we're identified as the ego, we're going to do everything in our power to stave off that return. Right? Because we're invested in illusion, and we want illusions to be real. And finally, how can the human ego, immersed in its own gratification, hide from the ever-present reality of God and the Spirit? How else than by a constant state of distraction into sensual pleasures, thoughts, memories, and fantasies, right? Conjurings. Thus, man's fall into disobedience was at once a fall into distraction. And that was how his consciousness started to become a compounded and fragmented, as compounded and fragmented as it is today. To distract himself from facing his wrongness, man seeks out the very things that made him wrong in the first place: self-love and sensual pleasure, right? So the remedy to feeling wounded or wrong at the center of our identity was caused by self-love, right? Narcissism, and indulging in the lower vibrations of sensual indulgence or sensual pleasure. The remedy now to fix the wrongness is love yourself and indulge in sensual pleasures. So do you see how that is just the problem disguised as the remedy? So gratifying himself in this way, he feels right again, but only temporarily. Actually, he has only become more wrong, so that now he needs even greater distractions and even greater shocks to make him feel that he is right. In this way, he progresses further along the path of self-destruction, trying to overcome his predicament by its very cause. So either way is self-destruction, right? But if you, as Jesus says, he who falls on this rock will be smashed, right? That's the dissolving of the ego. You'll join the rock. You'll be on holy ground. But he upon whom this rock falls will be annihilated. So there's self-destruction at either end. But one is a self-destruction guided by the psychosis of the ego, and the other is the self-destruction guided by the theosis of the spirit. So I leave you with this, your choice, psychosis or theosis. All right? Blue bag's going to go around. And as always, if you're joining on YouTube or Facebook, click the link below and support our 8 a.m. service here at Unity. Thank you very much. Thank you, my friend. We bless the offering, charge it with the intention that whatever form it may take, may it be the voice for God calling us home in one form or another. And so it is, amen. All right, my friends, let's seal the deal. Setting our mind to return to the center. Hopefully this talk inspired you to deepen your practice. And as we rest within the heart and be still, we know that the light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. Have a beautiful day, everybody. Much love. Happy New Year.